Hello, and welcome to the first webinar of a series on the topic Roadway Designer for Power Geopack. This webinar will focus on the basic corridor setup in Roadway Designer. My name is Kathy Gassar with MDOT Engineering Support Services. The future webinars in this series on Roadway Designer will cover point controls, parametric constraints, superelevation, driveways and ditches, template transitions, intersections and gores, and creating surfaces and plotted cross-sections. Before attempting to set up a corridor, it is necessary to know how to import the DDB, TIN, geometry, and plan view graphics into Corridor Modeler. We are going to be focusing on Roadway Designer itself in this series and not the importing process. However, if you are looking for some tips and tricks on importing graphics in Corridor Modeler, please see Part 1 of the existing template series. It is also necessary to know how to build a template. Please see the previous webinars on building the proposed template for Roadway Designer for more information on how to properly construct a project template. What you should have before you begin to work with Corridor Modeler and Roadway Designer are the following: a Geopack PRJ file created and opened, a working alignment definition defined and in use, a Corridor Modeler RDP or batch load file created and loaded, imported horizontal and vertical geometry and plan view graphics, and lastly, a project template created. Creating a corridor. In order to create a corridor in Roadway Designer, you will have to at the very least have imported the geometry. Plan view graphics can come later and can be continuously added as the project progresses. Once you have imported the geometry, you can then create a corridor and assign the horizontal and vertical control alignments for the corridor. You can also specify the station range for the corridor to be equal to or something less than the overall station range of the vertical alignment. That's an important point. If your horizontal stationing begins at station 10 plus 00, but your vertical alignment stationing does not begin until 10 plus 50, you will only be able to create a corridor for the roadway beginning at station 10 plus 50. What you name the corridor will also be the surface name when you process the 3D model. While the software does let you include spaces and other special characters in the dialog, I really recommend that the corridor name is less than 11 characters and does not include any spaces or special characters. There are many older functions in Geopack that still require that restricted naming convention, so it's better to use it and avoid those issues down the line. Underbars, of course, are okay. Once you have a corridor named, it's also a good idea to select the surface symbology of either DTM PR for the proposed top surface, DTM EX for an existing corridor pavement material, and then also the DTM temp for any temporary road modeling. Once a corridor is defined, you can then move on and assign a template. Assigning a template. You assign a template to the Template Drops dialog. You should use a spacing of no more than 10 feet for most projects. However, your template drop interval should be a multiple of the plotted cross-section spacing you intend to use. So say you want to plot cross-sections at a 25-foot interval, then you should drop your template at 5 feet so that you will process those sections at the 25-foot stations. If you drop your template every 10 foot and plot cross-sections every 25, every odd-numbered section, the 25 foot, 75 foot, 125, etc., may not tie to the existing ground very well because you haven't processed a section at that station. When we go to intersections, we will tighten up those template drops, but not in this initial corridor setup. Also note that if you have a very long tangent section, both in the horizontal and vertical alignment of over 1,000 feet in length, then it is acceptable to drop your templates at a 25-foot interval. The software does allow you to drop templates at wide intervals of, say, 25 feet or 50 feet and then densify the model in the horizontal and vertical curves. But I do not recommend going this route for projects with intersections and gores, since we will need to tighten up the template drop spacing in those locations. The densify option will tend to crash the model if you try and densify when you have added very tight template drops that you will need in the intersection and gore modeling areas. Assigning the active surface. Once you have a corridor and a template drop, you must set the active surface that the template end conditions will attempt to connect to. If you've only added one surface to Corridor Modeler, it will automatically set that surface as the active surface. However, if you have imported more than one surface into Corridor Modeler, or if you process a model, Roadway Designer will assign the last surface in the pick list as the active surface unless you set the lock option next to the active surface name. This is important as you add more surfaces for intersections and other existing and proposed surfaces that you may want Corridor Modeler to use for target aliasing. So reviewing the roadway. Once you have all the basic information assigned in Roadway Designer, you'll be able to step through the project and review the results. You can change the view options and even review the component quantities. So let's step out to the software and take a look at all those concepts and steps. So this is the project that we've been looking at. I'm using the same project that was used in the proposed template series to do this Roadway Designer series, so that you have the templates that we'll be using and you could follow along and do this webinar on your own, since those templates are in the default template library. Alright, some things to pay attention to. Again, with the GeoPack user preferences, my project has of course been set up with 4 decimal places here and the distance. And the reason is this is necessary for Roadway Designer if I want to see 2 decimal places when I am doing my super elevation calculations. So it's very important when you set your projects up that this decimal place was set to 4 decimal places, and that was mentioned in the existing template series when we did the corridor modeler setup. Alright, so taking a look here at corridor modeler, just to kind of run through again some of the basics. Of course, I'm set to even. I've got my templates and DTM paths have been set. The DDB has been imported. Under the DTM, you'll notice I have a couple of different DTMs, and the last one in the pick list is the existing ground, and that's so that one shows up as my active surface when I go into Roadway Designer. Under the geometry, you'll see that I have quite a lot of geometry imported here, and all this has to do with all the intersections as well as the mainline alignment. Under the plan view graphics, these are the various edges of pavement, back of curb, bike paths, and all that other information has been imported. Again, for specifics on how you go about this importing process, see the existing template series. It kind of runs you through how you do importing. And lastly, in the ALG viewer, of course, as I said before, if things do not appear in this ALG viewer, they will not be available to you in Roadway Designer. So even if you've import or set them here in the graphics and the geometry and the plan view graphics, if you've not hit the import button, if those elements do not exist here in the ALG viewer, they will not be available to you in Roadway Designer. Again, too, you'll notice that I do have my RDP file loaded, and I am in with a project file, and that I am working, of course, with a project loaded and a working alignment definition. Taking a look at our template again, I'm going to be working with proposed template 7. That is the last template that was built in the template library series. This, of course, does not include every alternative for the driveways, but it does give us a basis to kind of work with to see as the model's working, and to do the intersection modeling, since that was all set up. So again, this has in it the information on the shoulder curb. It will seek certain driveways, not all of the driveway options on this project, but a number of them, as well as it's set up for intersection. So this is the template that we are going to be using in our Roadway Designer training. To open Roadway Designer, click on the icon, and we're going to be creating a new corridor. As I said here, you have your active surface, so I'm going to hit the lock on the active surface, and that will maintain that as the surface that we will be using to connect our end conditions to. And I'm going to go and create a corridor. We're going to call it Road 1. Again, I recommend that be less than 11 characters, and it does not include any special characters. Under the surface symbology, I'll come into my pick list, and I'm going to pick a DTM proposed. This is going to be a proposed surface. This doesn't really have a whole lot of relevance in this current version, but it will as we go down the line, so I want to get you used to actually assigning a surface symbology. We're going to pick our alignment. In this case, we're going to pick the M26 alignment, and it also picked the profile, since I've only put one profile into my corridor modeler. Again, I can pick the station limits, and I'm just going to shrink it down. Alright, so I'll click my station. And if I hit the shift key and this radio button and I come out, I can snap to where I would like to start my project. And the same thing for the stopping the project. And I'm going to stop it before we get to that mill and fill section, somewhere out here. Alright, and then we can just round those off, and I'll just make that 1.00, and I'm going to stop it just at the 90. And then once you hit that, once you have that information in, you hit add, and you've created a corridor. As you get going, you can have more corridors. Every intersection is going to need a corridor, and every roadway that you model will need its own corridor, unless, depending on how you're going to do your templates. If you have a boulevard, you could have a northbound and a southbound, or you could create a template that includes both northbound and southbound, in which case you'd have one corridor. It really does depend on how you set up your template and how you want to work. In this case, I'm just going to have one roadway for right now, and that's going to be Road 1. Down the line, we'll add the intersection, so there'll be a corridor for each end of the intersection. So once I've added my corridor, I'll hit close, and you'll see that it has given me the limits of my active surface now in white. The alignment assigned to the corridor is here in blue in the upper left corner. If I hit this down here, you'll see that I am seeing both the proposed profile in blue and the active surface in white. Nothing in the cross section because we have yet to drop a template. So before I do that, I'll do a file save, and we'll go ahead and we'll make a new one. I'll call it webinar. So we'll save it as an IRD file. So now I have saved my IRD, and then I will come in and drop a template. Now you can get to your managed corridors under corridor management here, and you can also do your template drops here. I like the buttons down here. They're very handy. So this is my managed corridor button. This is my drop templates. Later I'll have point controls if there were end condition exceptions or display references, secondary alignments, key stations, creating a surface, options, and of course the template library. So in this case I will drop my template. My corridor shows up. This is the only corridor, so it's Road 1. My station limit starts at where I've picked my beginning station, and I'll set an interval. First I will come out here and pick my project template, new project, and I'll pick my proposed template 7. I'll change my interval. In this case I'm going to change it to 10 feet, and I'm intending to drop cross sections down the line every 50 feet. So that way I have an even station and I'm processing it at an even interval. And I'll hit add. As soon as I add, you'll notice that the template showed up in my cross-section view. Now, a couple things with this. If I come back through later and I change this template, in this dialog box down here, you'll notice that my template name would end up in blue. It would be written in blue if I go ahead and I were to change this template in the library. And what that means is that it's now out of sync. So if I change the template in the template library, I would select this and hit sync with library in order to make sure that then I have updated the two and connected them back together. You'll notice here that it also states, and I'll widen this out for a second, that this is revised in the ITL. And that means it is in the template library. It is not a template that has been edited here specifically in Roadway Designer. So for instance, if I hit edit on this and I come into the template and I'm just going to do a delete components, and I delete this end section for instance, and I hit OK. Now you'll notice that it is in red. Okay, so that is telling me that it is in the also in the IRD. And what that means is I have edited this template. It is no longer connected to the template in the template library. Okay, it has not been synchronized, and it has been specifically revised in the IRD. Okay, that means that this edit that I made will not show up in my template in the template library. It is only in the Roadway Designer file. All right, in order to correct that, I'll hit synchronize with the library again, and you'll notice that now it says revised in the ITL. That is very important to pay attention to that. If you have been editing templates, specifically one template dropper or something in the IRD, you can copy that back into the template library down the line if you need to. There's a document out there about working with the template library organizer that will kind of walk you through how you would copy your templates from the IRD to the template library if you need to. However, in most cases you want this to be synced so that those templates can be edited in the library and then of course used down the line and used on multiple corridors. It's very difficult to copy a template that you may edit in one corridor, and then if you want to assign it to another corridor in your same IRD file, you have to then take it back out to the template library and then bring it back in to that other corridor. Okay, so that's this kind of dialog. Again, if your name shows up in red, it's either been edited here in the IRD file, or it has been deleted from the template library, or it is not in the active template library that you have loaded. Okay, your modeling will still work if you have a template that has its name in blue or red. It will just be using different data than might be out in your template library. Alright, so once we have a source assigned our template, we can then step through the project. And you'll notice that as I hit the forward button, I am processing it it's looking every 10 feet on those even stations, and that's based on the dialogues and the toggles that we have set previously. Even though I started on station 1, it was still going every 10 feet. It may also, you'll see, it may also pick a station, an odd station such as this, and that is because of some other toggles we'll set. And I'm going to go to Tools, I'm going to go to the Options, and that's also, again, Tools Options. Under this dialog, I typically would turn off any of those if I was going to be doing my modeling. I don't need to see those reporting options. They kind of slow things down. But because I am telling it to process on the horizontal and vertical cardinal points, that's your PIs and your PTs and your PCs and your VPIs, your VPTs, your VPCs, it's going to be processing there, and also any external control points. External control points are things like parametric constraints and point controls. Okay, so because I am processing right now on my vertical and horizontal cardinal points, you may see an odd station like this, and that is most likely either a vertical point or a horizontal point of some sort. Alright, so we can step through. Now you can also control how this template looks in this dialog. If you click the display properties, right now it's set to center it on the backbone. You can set it to fit the solution. If I hit that, you'll see that it expands it so that it fits into this dialog box. If I change it, you can center it with a particular offset, so I can set it with a screen width. I can predefine that in the vertical exaggeration. I like 2, some people like 5 or 10, and you'll see that it modifies this dialog. Again, that's from your display properties. Alright, we'll leave that one alone. You can also edit this station directly. Now, you don't want to do that if you have your template library open in the background, because what will happen is it will get confused with the template library that's already open. It will try and save it. It could potentially cause you to crash. You have to be careful with this. When you hit this button, you are, of course, editing in the IRD file. If I made edits to there and I hit OK, it would change my template drop. It would add a template drop at that station. All right. The other way to do that is if you double-click in that, and I'm going to just hit OK for a minute, and what we'll see is if I go back to my template libraries, you'll see that it has dropped a station now at that 90. I'm in blue, and it says it was still in ITL. Now that's because I've dropped a single station and I've done edits. And even though I haven't actually edited anything, because I dropped it through the editing dialog box, it says it's not synced. Okay, and it doesn't know that it says it survives in the ITL because I haven't really done anything else with it. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and delete that if we don't need that, and hit close. Again, right-clicking, you can do things called place a temporary dimension line. If I select a point with the left click and then I come down and I'll select another left click on the face of curve, you'll see that it gives me in my dialog here the width and the slope. Now as I scroll through, you'll see that it maintains that, and we'll pick something else that may change. Of course, there's no super elevation. So that would continue to remain until I close this down. So if I place another temporary dimension line, maybe on the bike path, and as I scroll through, you see that dimension line stays even when the bike path disappears because I entered an intersection, and the template set up to deal with an or at least to show an intersection, that there's something there. All right, we'll pick something more dynamic so you can see it. I'll pick it here and here, and then now you can see what's happening with the slopes. So the temporary dimension lines are helpful when you're trying to track something particular like your driveway slopes or your end conditions or things like, or watch your pavement, make sure your pavement is following your edges of pavement or your slopes correctly. And lastly is the right click and display. With the display, you can of course set those same things, your vertical exaggeration, how to handle the slope if it reaches a certain percentage or greater, the precision that you want to see, and then what you're looking for with your titles and descriptions and things of that nature, what you want to see shown up. Okay, so I hit apply, close. Alright, so that is the basics of the Roadway Designer window. Some other things to note. This station range down here, I can always type in a station, 33 plus 0, 0, and then I'll click down below in the interval. Now that does it will navigate to that station location. However, it also, if you come under corridor and then you go to key stations, you'll see that it wants to add that as a key station. Now if I pick something that was odd, and the reason it didn't add it there is because it's actually a station it would process. Now if I added 33.1, okay, and I click down here, now if I come up to corridor key stations, you'll see that it has appeared in this dialog. Alright, so any station that you key in that is not a station that is already processing, not a VPI, not a VPC, and not a station that is the interval that we're processing, it will create that as a key station. Now you can delete that, but that's a good way to do things like your intersections and make sure that it processes at the beginning and the ending of the radii of the intersection. Or if you need a particular location for it to model, maybe you want to model at the end of an approach. A drive approach or a bridge approach or any other, maybe a wall or a beginning of a ditch, and you want to make sure that the program will model at those stations. You can key those in as key stations either here in the station box or up in corridor modeler key stations, and just type in your key stations. Alright, that can also be helpful in the case of driveways. If your driveways happen to be very narrow and you're only getting one model point at that driveway, so it's only modeling maybe the center or one location, when you go to cut your cross sections, those components will not show up in your cross sections. So you need to have at least 2 modeling points within a driveway. So if your driveways are too narrow and the program is not at an interval where it's hitting the driveway at more than one location, when you cut your cross sections, it will not show up. Those driveways will not show up in your cross sections. So sometimes it may be helpful, depending on how many driveways that you have, to go in and create your key stations at the beginning and the ending of your driveways. And that way you make sure you get a full component for those, and that you get those driveways showing up in your cross sections. It's probably something I wouldn't worry about until maybe down the line when your driveways stop moving around, as they tend to on projects, but it's something to consider when you're modeling your driveways. Alright, some other things to pay attention to. This yellow line, as we know, will step us back and forth. We can either pull it and drag it along and it will take us through the project. Alright, you can step through, you can step to the end, you can go to a particular station, again by clicking that radio button, and it will take you to a location. So if you're trying to see where you are and you don't remember what the station is, but you know where it is in plan view, you can come out here and you can pick it. Of course, it gives you the template that you're currently on, so if you have multiple templates in your corridor, it will show you what template is currently in use. Down here in the bottom, of course, now we're in normal view. If we had super elevation set up, which we'll do later down the line, you could be in the super elevation mode. And then, of course, if we were doing an overlay project and we wanted some information on the overlay, we could be in the overlay mode. Alright, another little tidbit on this thing, if I'm going to drag this all the way to the end, and then I come up into Tools and go to Component Quantities, you'll see here that it gives me a quantity list. And this is based on the style of the elements in the template. Alright, so all of the components that have the style with the leveling course for a bike path on top, it gives you the volumes of those. If you have the curb component, it's going to give you the volume of that. Any component that is a closed shape, it will give you a volume. Any element like the surface that is a linear, just not a shape but a line, it will give you the surface area. Alright, this gives you the total based on the location of this line. So if I bring it back to the beginning of the project and I hit Tools and Component Quantities, you'll see I have nothing here in my list. Alright, but if I go one station in and do Tools and Component Quantities, it begins to fill out this information. So it only does it based on what is currently the limits that you've assigned in your template, how far you have gone along your roadway. So it's kind of a neat, quick and dirty way to kind of get a look at what you've got in your project and in overall quantities. If you assigned a unit cost to any of these, you could then be looking at total. So if you had maybe two different options, you had an HMA option and a concrete option, you had both of them in different templates. If you assigned unit costs, you could maybe get in a quick and dirty look at what the cost differentials may be between the two projects. All right, it doesn't really give you your earthwork calculations in there. However, it does give you a look at the overall material costs. Okay, so if you fill out that or not. But it's nice to get a look at your quantities and your volumes. And of course, if you have the volume and you know your depth or your width, you can then get the actual pay item and calculate it backward if you need to. We still support the end area volume. That is the official calculation method for doing our quantities and our earthwork and things like that. However, this is a good way to take a look at what's going on and compare the two numbers together as a second look. It also gets you just kind of some quick numbers to work with right off the bat. So there's a lot of other functions and tools. We'll get into quite a few of these when we get into the next set of webinars, such as target aliasing, parametric constraints. There's some curve widening. In other words, if you had a very tight curve and you needed to widen out a section in order to handle truck turning movements and things like that, there's some tools in there for that. There's some tools in here to calculate your gores. We're not going to really talk about those too much, but there are some tools in there for that you can play around with, as well as some other reporting. You can get to your template library here under Tools Template Library. That will open up your current template library loaded, or as I said, I like to use the Open Template Library button. So that is there for you to use. We will talk about super elevation once we get to that section in the webinars. And of course, the Create Surface. Any of the options for the template drops and things like I said are available through Corridor Modeler, and I will do a save. And we'll save this file. One thing to note, there is this process all. What process all does is it actually kind of creates a temporary surface in memory. So if you hit that, it kind of goes through all your template and over the surface across the whole corridor, across the entire station range, and creates a temporary surface in memory. The issue with that is once it does that, it begins to tie up your RAM. As I've said before, Power Geopack Roadway Designer runs in RAM, so it will begin to eat up your RAM if you hit that button quite a lot, and your program will begin to slow down and eventually crash. So I don't really recommend using the Process All button. I would say if you need to see a particular station, either navigate yourself to it, type it in and get there, or drag this yellow line back and forth your project. When you do that, it just kind of takes a look at things, but it doesn't actually create that surface. And that way my memory is not being eaten up by hitting that Process All button. Alright, so that's very important. I tend not to use that at all, and I don't really recommend it. So that was a quick look at the Roadway Designer setup and the dialog. For some hands-on training for MDOT staff and those with access to Bentley Learn, try the course Road Fundamentals using Geopack. It will cover many of the topics that we went over in this webinar. There's also some supplemental training material available in ProjectWise. MDOT staff, please email the MDOT Power Geopack support email address if you need help locating it. This concludes part 1 of the Roadway Designer series. Thank you.